Well, on behalf of Amplify, I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us today virtually for our discussion focused on high-impact tutoring as a promising response to learning loss. We are joined here today by our K-12 education experts, Larry Berger and Susanna Loeb. They will each walk us through the emerging role of remote tutoring as a new solution to meet this moment of profound disruption in K-12 education. They will share with us also their insights on how the research has long backed the efficacy of tutoring. However, one of the things that we will delve deeper in is how the resource of tutoring, while it's been around for a long time, it has been out of the reach of many children due to the price tag attached to tutoring. But first, before I go too deep into the issue, let's first meet the speakers. Dr. Susanna Loeb is a professor of education and international public affairs at Brown University, where she also serves as the director at the Annenberg Institute at Brown University. Brown University is also incubating right now the National Student Support Accelerator, which is a new organization focused on tutoring, centralizing tutoring resources, research, tools, and best practices to improve and expand and scale tutoring programs nationwide. Dr. Loeb's research focuses broadly on education policy, as well as improving educational outcomes for students. Before moving to Brown, she was in my home state of California at Stanford University, where she was a Barnett Family Professor of Education. She was also the founding director for the Center for Education Policy in Stanford and co-director of the Policy Analysis for California Education. Thank you for joining us, Susanna. Larry Berger currently serves as our CEO and co-founder of Amplify, which turned 20 years old this July, if you can believe it. Larry, in his capacity as our leader, has led the invention of mobile software to help early reading teachers, as well as the creation of next generation curriculum for elementary and middle school students. Before joining and co-founding Amplify, which was Wireless Generation 20 years ago, Larry was a Rhodes Scholar and also a White House Fellow working on EdTech at NASA. He was also a Pahara Aspen Education Fellow, and Larry currently serves on the boards of Touch Press, the Academy of American Poets, Lapham's Quarterly, and the Institute for Sustained Attention. He has also helped launch the National Student Support Accelerator, which we'll hear more about from both Susanna and Larry, and serves on its advisory board. A fun fact about Larry is that as a very young child, he was responsible for the demise of a Muppet on Sesame Street, which Larry, I hope, will tell us more about in a little bit. I just want to say at the front end, Susanna and Larry, thank you so much for graciously making time for us to talk about this exciting issue. I know that I'm personally really excited about hearing about this, and I know the folks in the room are as well. Before we dive in, Larry, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the Sesame Street story? Oh, you're on mute, Larry.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I was thinking I might keep people guessing, and if people still wonder during Q&A, then I will fill you in on which Muppet I was responsible for no longer being with us. But if you are young enough that you didn't see Sesame Street in the early 1970s, you might not even know the Muppet whose demise I am responsible for, although you may know him in his reincarnated form. And I'll leave it there. Keep people guessing.
All right, I like it. So let's dive into the conversation. As I mentioned at the top of this call or this session, we know that tutoring has long been an integral component for our students in K-12 education, all the way through college and graduate school even. And we know that, so while that has been around for a long time, the concept of delivering tutoring remotely is new. And from what I understand, is starting to take traction or make traction out across the field. And we know that this solution has emerged as a prominent policy proposal. And so we were hoping that, Susanna, you could walk us through the research behind this, because we know that that is a strong anchor, and you could talk to us a little bit more about how this is the topic in terms of the policy circles.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks all of you for being here. So tutoring's been around for a long time, as you know. I was looking it up, and Aristotle tutored Alexander the Great. This is not kind of a new intervention that we have here. And we also have unusually good evidence that tutoring's effective. I have a little slide here that shows this a bit. Summaries of studies show really consistently large effects, many months of tutoring for a variety of high dosage kinds of tutoring. And here's just an example on this slide where you can see the blue bars here are tutoring. And this is for elementary school and secondary school. And when you compare it to something like computer-assisted instruction in orange, or for elementary schools, to really substantial reductions in class size, which are also fairly resource-intensive interventions, that tutoring really emerges as having bigger effects than either of these. So it's been around for a while, and we've seen good effects. And on top of this, many families who have resources choose to hire tutors for their children. So the idea of having schools providing tutoring is relatively new and slowly growing, but it's based on something that's been around for a while. And I think one of the reasons that it's been slow to grow, but is now emerging, is because we suddenly have this better research evidence about how effective it is. And that's largely because we now have so many more assessments available. So we have this situation with tutoring accepted and with strong research, and then the pandemic hit, shuttering schools across the nation and causing really extensive disruptions in learning for, all 50 million public school students. And some initial evidence is coming out about learning loss. There were lots of projections, but it's kind of hard to project because you don't know exactly what's happening to students. But here's a case where we do have some evidence, and this is for kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade. And what it is a comparison of scores at the beginning, the fall of 2019, 2020 versus 2020, 2021. So before the pandemic and now with the pandemic. And this is the percent of students significantly at risk. And if you just look at first graders on here, you can see that 27% last year were significantly at risk, but 40% of the ones this year are significantly at risk. And this is for a particular school district, but we don't have data across the country right now, given that it's the pandemic and we often don't have data in the fall. But you can see where we have it. It shows really that the pandemic has caused big effects on some students and likely increased achievement gaps quite a bit. Okay, so I think we can go back to taking those off, or if you know how to get rid of that slide, that would be great. So basically, many high-income families turn to tutoring, and that reduced the negative educational impacts for their children, but likely meaningfully increased the already striking differences in achievement across groups. So now we have a situation where we have a clear need for personalized and differentiated instruction. And on top of this, we have an unusually strong research base supporting the effectiveness of tutoring. And so now we have this kind of push it's not just us thinking about tutoring. It's in some ways a very obvious response to what is a really new situation. Under normal circumstances, it might be difficult to get together the diverse coalition that you need for the large scale change. But so we have a situation here which is really, in some ways, really disturbing with huge achievement gaps. But at the same time, it has a potential because we need kind of real changes in how we provide schooling, and we have this opportunity there that we might not have been able to use before because we weren't going to make these big changes. But now that we are, tutoring really emerged as a promising approach for what we can do. So last spring, I was talking with Larry, and he mentioned, and I mentioned that I'd been in conversations about this kind of high impact tutoring with other researchers at an organization called JPAL. And Larry had also been thinking about how to scale high impact tutoring. And he introduced me to the working group that he was working with to look at tutoring and how you would scale it. And that's really how we began these talks about how to take what we know about tutoring and think about what it needs in order to scale effectively. And those talks have progressed over the past 3 months, and we've been developing a proposal for how we can scale high quality tutoring to address the pandemic related learning loss, and then to go from there and make tutoring part of school's core instruction so that every student can have access to the personalized supports that we see in the research really benefits them in the long run. So the proposal that we're putting together, I think, has the dual benefit of addressing addressing these learning losses, but it comes at a time when we also have these big economic need. We've got a lot of unemployment and underemployment due to the recession, and many potential workers, including recent college graduates, need skill building work, and tutoring can provide some of it. The tutoring jobs benefit the K-12 students, but they would also give tutors job skills and create new pipelines for the teaching workforce that could bring in teachers with the needed skills in STEM fields and dual language learning, and it could diversify the teacher workforce. So we were thinking that it's really an unusual situation where you have intervention that's really proven to work. You've got a situation where you could put it in because an opening has come where it really fits the need, and it also addresses the needs of the workforce to build skills in a time when we've lost a lot of jobs. So we looked more deeply into what it would take to expand tutoring to those students and to provide the tutoring jobs. And we found that incorporating new programs into a school's academic program can be hard, not surprisingly, and that schools are already overwhelmed with the change they need to support students during COVID. In addition, the field of tutoring is really fragmented. So we've been talking about all these positive results, and they are there, and they're kind of consistently there, but not for all forms of tutoring. Tutoring, while there are many programs that show strong effects, there are also many approaches to tutoring that are unlikely to get you those really strong effects. So it's difficult for schools to develop tutoring programs with confidence because they don't have, we haven't really set on standards for what works. So one of the things we're working on now is what kind of supports are needed to expand access to tutoring for the students who need it in a high quality way. And the solution is out there. The research is strong. The pandemic increased students' needs and actually decrease the effectiveness of non-tutoring educational approaches. And these forces came together to create the window that we have today to really put tutoring in at a large scale level so that it can serve more than just the students whose parents can afford to do it. So I think it's kind of an obvious approach what many people have been talking about, and we've really been bringing together a large group of people to try to figure out how we can have a coalition, a diverse coalition to make this happen.
So much for that. Thank you for walking us through.
Julia, somehow.
Yes, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I wasn't getting sound for a second there, but now I am.
Okay, perfect. No, I just wanted to say thank you, Susanna, for walking us through the sort of pathway of research and answering this this profound need that students and teachers and parents also have for their kiddos. One of the things I wanted to do was to ask you, Larry, a little bit more about your work. I know that you're part of a working group, and you also serve on the advisory board for the Accelerator. I was hoping you could walk this audience through your areas of interest, and then also put on your Amplify hat and tell us about the work that Amplify is working on in terms of tutoring anchored in high quality curriculum.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So as Susanna said, I think there was kind of a moment when people were looking at the magnitude of the likely learning loss. We were watching our affluent friends and family members moving quickly to get things in place so that their kids would stay engaged. And there was a bit of a sense that while the Zoom-based synchronous class was kind of the best thing we had, it was vividly not working for lots of kids. Like they were, putting their head in the couch pillows and saying, I don't want to do another Zoom. And yet there were stories of like people connecting remotely with tutors and having better experiences. And I think, we'll talk about some of the research, but some of what goes right when people tutor is there's a little bit more capacity to spend time getting to know the person who is your tutee, and a personal relationships develops, and that sense that someone's going to ask me if I did the work that I said I would do between this meeting and last time, which in this era of kind of overwhelmed teachers trying to make the big Zoom class work is just not as likely that it's going to go that way in ordinary class. And so I think it was a kind of great thing where Susanna and a bunch of researchers and district practitioners were talking. And since, I'm in the private sector, I was talking to a few other companies. And interestingly, at the time, Amplify wasn't tutoring. Like, we do a lot of things around curriculum, around supplemental instruction, but I just thought this seemed like a right solution, and it was early pandemic days, and everyone was trying to figure out what can I do to help. And then because this is the time that it is, the thing you can do to help is declare a Zoom meeting and invite lots of people to it. And lo and behold, a whole bunch of people showed up, started getting to work on the possibility that a kind of institution needed to be created, because it was likely that lots of programs were going to get started in school districts and in after-school centers or in community initiatives. We were already seeing college students gathering to offer tutoring services because they don't have other employment and they want to be helpful right now, and they got time on their hands. And then luckily, we also had some folks in the policy conversation from both sides of the aisle saying, this feels like one of those ideas that could get traction. It doesn't feel like it's a partisan idea one way or another, and people are putting in place stimulus and relief programs. And when the next education one rolls around, it might be good if we really understand how real is the possibility of tutoring as a response to educational slide and job loss for the group of often college-educated people who are not finding opportunities for work. And so nobody knows whether this is going to become national policy, but one of our goals was to say, let's try to put in place an organization that could be a kind of clearinghouse for the best research about what's working in tutoring, experiences from practice, because some of this remote tutoring, we weren't going to have time to do a 3-year randomized control study. We're going to have to just say, we tried it and here's what happened. And I guess in some ways, my story of getting even more involved in it is just that once we were interested in it, and I was talking with school superintendents and districts about what they need, I suddenly found myself saying, you might, if you're really facing those kinds of data that Susanna was showing, like tutoring might be the thing that we know about that can close a really big gap in a reasonable amount of time. and that might be the investment to make. And before long, we were off and running with Sonia Santelises in Baltimore with an effort to do some significant tutoring in early literacy with her.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that work, or a preview for what's going on in Baltimore City?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll say that one of the interesting questions that we are trying to figure out as an organization is, what are the drivers of tutoring costs, and how can we configure tutoring in ways that that might make it even more affordable for districts to reach even more kids? And so one of the questions is, can tutoring be a hybrid experience? Can there be some software and some human interaction, and what's the right balance of those things? Can tutoring be a small group rather than an individual activity? And, you know, with those compromises that might save you some money, could you actually still get the results that Susanna was showing? And I want to pause for a second, because that was a slide that was describing the results in terms of effect sizes, but it would be great to get a kind of layperson translation, if Susanna's willing to do it, like, what does it mean to have something that is a 0.25 effect size in terms of what kinds of gap closing, you know, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. What?
Well, that's really a good question. And, you know, the reason that it's tricky is because that varies across grades. Mm-hmm. So when kids are very young, there might be, for example, a standard deviation difference, which is what these are, just like how an average difference across students that is quite big, but they learn a lot in a year. So they learn about a standard deviation or more in a year. And so you really have this opportunity to close gaps. So as you can see in this slide, for pre-kindergarten, for example, you can get really big effects of tutoring, really twice as big as this, but it's a similar amount of months. It's kind of half a year of school you get in preschool from tutoring. And it actually is at least that much as you go up to high school. So the high school standard deviations are smaller, but the actual amount that kids learn in a year is small. And that's because if you think of what separates students, what's an average difference across students, in high school, it's been many years making those average differences. And so you have many years of work to do to get the difference between someone who hasn't had all those kinds of inputs and somebody who has. You've got many years to do it, so that if you have an effect like this, which is even something like 0.2 standard deviations, that could still easily be 4 months of learning. So what you're talking about here in tutoring is something really in the range of a quarter to a year to a full year of growth or more that you gain from having a tutor. And the high dosage tutoring is pretty high dose. It's, you know, a few hours a week, every week, often with the same tutor. So it's a pretty intensive intervention and can be, like you were saying, quite costly, but it actually turns out to also be quite cost effective as an approach, because you get such big gains from it.
So consistency is key, right? That's the one major takeaway for this audience. It's not a haphazard sort of once a month or once every several weeks. It's the consistency that matters for our children.
I think consistency, yes. And then what's interesting, you know, complicated to say in some settings, but let's say it here, is that classroom effect sizes for classroom instruction seem to be highly, highly teacher dependent. And tutoring, it seems that the phenomenon of tutoring is where a bunch of the effect is. So it is possible to take people who aren't certified expert teachers and still they need training, they need orientation, they need to be selected with adequate expertise in the subject matter, but it seems there is something about the personal attention that you get. I mean, one of the things that the kids in our tutoring program in Baltimore all acknowledge is, like, I have to be on mute all the time in Zoom class. The teacher puts us all on mute. In tutoring, I get to be off mute. Like, there's only 3 of us. We can talk whenever we want. And that small difference is game changing in terms of the energy that kids have for it. And so I think one of the reasons why we're enthusiastic about it as an intervention in this moment is that that a lot of other things aren't working, and this seems to be something that's somewhat robust in terms of working in different contexts, in different settings with different human capital.
And Larry, I think it makes sense because for tutoring, while you still need to have the desire to work with the students and to be able to engage the students that you're working with, you don't need to build lesson plans and know how to, adapt curriculum, and you don't have to do any classroom management. It's really allows you to focus and not develop all those skills that teachers need. Teachers are actually one of the most effective tutors, so it's great if you can have tutors, but you don't need them. Really, a wide range of tutors have shown pretty good effectiveness in these studies.
And in part because in tutoring, I think, like at the fundamental level, you're starting with the kid and where they are. Whereas as a classroom teacher, you have to start maybe with the standard or the curriculum or the lesson and hope that you can reach all of the kids. And that's not, it's both the power of personalization, but it's also kids can tell the difference. This is someone who's starting by saying, so how are you? Where are you? What do you need help with? And if the kids don't know the answer to that, let's do something together. What do you think of this? And that's just a different starting point than classroom instruction has the luxury of engaging.
I think that's right. And the classroom instruction, one of the things that you do get though is that all students have access to it and students are required to show up for it. And I think that turns out to be important in this high impact tutoring as well. So sometimes when, I thought of tutoring initially, I thought it was, let's go out when I need a tutor and try to find somebody and the student determines what they need to do. But that's really hard for some students. And these programs that have gotten strong effects have often been embedded in the school somehow, either in the school day, in a course, or right after school as part of an extended day, so that it really reaches all the students and the students know where to go. Because my guess is that's one of the harder parts of providing high quality tutoring is having the students be there and know that this is something that that is there to help them, that they don't have to initiate it to make it happen.
Yeah.
That's really important. Structure, meeting the children where they are is really essential. One of the things I was hoping we could talk about, or we can save it for Q&A, is we know that this is underway in the state of Maryland. Maryland dedicated some of its CARES Act funds towards remote tutoring. And so Baltimore City Public Schools is one that we're working with. Are there other school districts or schools that are interested in this work, Susanna and Larry, that you can preview for this audience?
Yeah, I think part of the idea, Julia, has been to find example programs and around the country, some of which, seriously pre-existed this moment and have been doing great work in tutoring, but often funders and districts are interested in those programs scaling to the next level. And we're trying to have a mix of those proven, established. There's one called Saga that is always much admired in these conversations. Some new instances where a player like us who's done a lot of work in literacy in the early grades is now adding tutoring, but it's new to us. We're finding our way as we go. And then some small startups, some nonprofits, some organizations that have sprung into existence, but who are all agreeing to try to abide by what the research says is getting these high dosage tutoring results. And so, I'll say a little bit about the thing we do in Baltimore, and then I think Susanna can flesh out some of the other things that we're looking at. But again, the goal is to have a place where someone in this audience or a policy maker, as you once were on the Hill, Julia, can come and say, tell me what's out there, tell me what's working, show me some examples, so that when we sit down to figure out what's the engine of scaling this, we can write legislation that's supportive of that. So in our case, we're tutoring about 2,500 K-5 students in a little over 500 small groups. So that means there's 3 to 5 students in each. I will be honest and say one of the biggest challenges that everybody's encountering in education these days is attendance. Are kids showing up? Are they tuning in? While we think that tutoring actually inspires, especially if it's happening in the school day, kids to be a little bit more enthusiastic about tutoring, I won't hide the fact that in a place like Baltimore, the digital divide issues, the logistics issues, the challenges that kids in homes and the access to devices face, like we are not consistently getting our 3 to 5 kids in each group. But we are getting to do a whole ton of tutoring sessions, and they are 30 minutes, 3 times a week at a dedicated time in the school day. We are placing kids in groups based on foundational literacy assessments that we happen to be the provider of in Baltimore. To hit that number of groups, we had to recruit 70 tutors. We made an effort, again, this is based on some of the research about tutoring, to recruit folks local to Baltimore City. We worked with local historically Black colleges and universities to do a bunch of that recruiting. We like that for 2 reasons. One, kids are being tutored by folks who look like them and have backgrounds that they share. But also the pandemic economic impact is in Baltimore as serious as it is everywhere. And so there's a sudden new set of jobs that are happening. And it's early literacy. We are a few weeks into this. I'll report back on whether it works, but the folks who are tutoring are describing kids who are just kind of relieved that there's a grown-up whose job is to pay attention to them in a very small group for 30 minutes. And some of the stories that I love are just, it's so personal in a socio-emotional way. I don't just mean like personalized at the level, but one of the tutors informed me that she does all of her tutoring with this one group in a British accent, and the kids in Baltimore are themselves doing a British accent. And I said, well, wait, are you from England? Do you have a British accent? And she said, nope, the kids decided they wanted to talk in a British accent, and so we're all doing British accents. And that's how our tutoring session goes. Like, there might be classrooms where that same thing could happen, but it's sort of a small group dynamic, and it has to do with like, I'm here to have an exchange with you, and then we'll get to the teaching and learning that I think is part of that magic. But Susanna, tell us where else what other kinds of things are we looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to highlight that. I think all of the people who have run these successful tutoring programs, Alan Safran from Saga, I mean, much of the evidence, particularly on middle and high school math, comes from his work, and he's been testing a bunch of different approaches to also improve cost effectiveness. And Robert Slavin, too, in early literacy, his work showing all of the effects of tutoring there. So there are a lot of different programs, and they all come back to this idea that it's really this connection that drives the effectiveness, because the students want to be there and to work with the tutor because they have that kind of close connection. So when Larry and I were trying to think about what we could do to help this move forward, one of the things we wanted to know were, what are some of the most important features of tutoring that districts and other educational institutions are looking for? And then what are some of the difficulties in implementing tutoring in districts and in schools? And so what we wanted to do was try a bunch of test cases around the country and see what different districts were interested in and what happened once it went in. And it's only been going on for a couple of months now, so we're not that far along, but we do have 9 different test case sites across the country, funded by a variety of funders, the Gates Foundation, Zoom, and so we're seeing we are seeing big interest in early literacy and then in kind of algebra and pre-algebra. And we're seeing interests in working with English language learners for tutoring. But the districts are trying different kinds of programs. And again, I think what we've been focused on is how can we make sure that the students who really need it the most have access to it. And that's what the district's interests have been too. So we'll have more to learn later, but we have a few sites in Colorado or in California and in Texas and in North Carolina. One group that I'm particularly interested in is a supplier of teachers, and Larry mentioned this too, is universities, which is where I work. And I think they have a potential because they have a lot of students who would be interested in this, and they also train teachers, so it's a very nice progression from being a student to being a teacher. And so in Providence, for example, we're really seeing what we can do in terms of universities, as well as what Larry's doing in Baltimore and also in Guilford County. We're working, these are in early stages, but with universities down there. So I think there are lots of promising things to come. And one thing to note is really all of the districts that we approached were interested. So it isn't something that you have to fight to get interest in. You just have to figure out the steps that you need to do to implement it effectively. And because we're relatively new at getting it in at scale, we have to kind of figure out what the different things are that we'll have to address as it goes in.
That's a really good point. I think that maybe perhaps we can do a progress report next year to see how things are going, or maybe even a midway point. We can host something through Amplify and talk about some of the work that's going on in the field. One of the things that we also wanted to share with this audience was, how do you launch this kind of program? We know that it's nascent in terms of a remote program. And I know that you both have learned some different pointers in terms of how to scale this effectively. We're also receiving questions about that in the chat. So if you had to boil it down, Larry and Susan, what few things would you say are important for policymakers to think about if they want to launch their own program at scale effectively?
Yeah, happy to talk through a few of the ingredients that we're looking for. I mean, the first thing I would say is we are seeing this as an iterative learning process. We're posting what the field knows now, much of it derived from in-person tutoring, some of it applied to remote tutoring. So we know that there may not even be a perfect translation from one to the other. And we are expecting that we will just keep learning things and posting things and sharing. And so right now, if someone says to us, exactly how big is the largest small group that you should work with, we might say, I don't know, this program is using 1-to-1, this one's using 1-to-5, here's what we're hearing, but you might chart your course between those two sizes or do some experimentation. And if you do that experimentation, report your findings back to us so we can share it with the larger community of folks who are trying to solve this. So maybe we'll share at the end of this just the website of the National Student Support Accelerator, which is this organization that we've brought into existence to try to share these findings. And that'll be a place where you could go to find these white papers, to find these resources. They're not all there yet because this is all new, but there's some stuff there already, and check back frequently. I mean, I would say we've got five kind of bullets on what it is that you might want to do as you put these programs together, and I'll power through them. You got to identify the needs. Who are the priority students? What are the data showing you? As Susanna showed, like, we're seeing this kind of tragic issue at first grade. These are kids who should have been getting their foundational reading skills all the way through kindergarten last year. That got disrupted. It's hard to be successful at remote learning if you don't have reading skills yet. And so if you see that gap there, it is a huge increase of at-risk kids at first grade. It's also problematic at all the other grades because there's COVID slide happening to all kids. or to most kids, and statistically it's pervasive, but you could see why it might be even more intense at first grade. Other districts are seeing upper elementary or middle school math as a place to be serious, or the push into algebra. There are lots of needs, but pick ones that you know are going to be high leverage. The second one is to have access for your tutors to high quality instructional materials. I want to say it's important, tutoring is not classroom teaching. And so one of the things that you don't want to do is say to your tutors, start the kids on lesson 1 and power through them all the way to lesson 77, because that's often what the classroom is doing, and the kids who are in tutoring may precisely be there because what's happening in the classroom doesn't line up with what they need for their own learning. So it's important to train tutors that what you're saying is meet the kid, figure out where they are, understand what they need, look at data if the district can share it with you about where that student is, have access to great instructional materials that address the different needs that kids have and that give your tutors, frankly, confidence. But make sure that you're starting from the kid and not the curriculum each time you do tutoring. You want to have a quality and consistent approach for both teachers and students. That includes just the idea that students have to be at the tutoring sessions. And I think this is a real challenge during the pandemic. Like it's, the attendance is a bit wonky everywhere. And, one of the questions I saw in the chat sounds like you guys are talking about school day tutoring. And I don't think we are intellectually certain that school day tutoring is the only place we could see results. It's just one of the places where people have been able to manage getting kids consistently there for tutoring. And the research about these big effects is 3 times a week tutoring, which adds up to 50 hours or more over 4 months, should be a kind of baseline that you're trying to achieve. It's hard to get that if you're fitting into the rest of kids' day. Make sure the tutors are carefully screened. That's about confidence in your community, but also making sure that you've got people who will do a good job. And then be creative about the funding. I think, you will likely find that there are dollars in your local budgets, in your local philanthropy, in some of the relief bills that are making their way through Washington, and getting a tutoring program in place is probably about juggling some of all of that. And I do think it's, we have been finding that it is something that local philanthropy can get their head around. It's like getting jobs to young people in our community, getting good education that might address the COVID slide. It's an attractive idea. And it's worth saying we're not the only, this is something that other countries are looking at too. We're trying to learn from the $442 million that the UK set aside for tutoring programs in their primary and secondary schools. So I think this is likely to be a hot policy idea. And I guess the other suggestion I would make is don't wait until the dollars come en masse from Washington. I think if anybody lived through supplemental education services, we all have some scars from that because it's hard to put in place a new program for the first time at real scale. So I would roll up your sleeves and try to get going with your first 25 tutors, your first 7 tutors helping in your community, so that when potential funding shows up where you could be serving thousands of kids, you're ready. You've got some ideas about what worked for you and what didn't.
I just want to add one thing to that, is that I think those are just the right things for the districts to be considering as they put this in. As a country and as a group, I think we can do things as well to make it easier to have really easily available information, essentially tools. So this is how you might select a tutor. These are some good materials that tutors should have access to, those kinds of things. That can ease the implementation, because as Larry was saying, we do see in NCLB, for example, the that the sudden push towards tutoring had some places where it worked really well, actually, and those were kind of more structured programs like the ones we've been talking about, but many programs like that didn't come up. That it was much less high. I mean, a lot of them weren't what we would now call high impact kinds of approaches to tutoring. And so that if we could kind of be a source of information, as we should be, and a place to kind of align the goals of the tutoring with the goals of the district, I think we would be in much better shape to be able to implement something like this at scale. And I think that's really why Larry and I have been trying to work on this. We've done, a lot of interviews with districts across the country, and there is this kind of what should we do question, which is, I think, what Larry was trying to answer, and having things there that make it easier, particularly at this time where they're also trying to understand what HVAC system works well, is really important. There's not a lot of extra bandwidth out there, so let's really make it as easy as possible to do this at high quality.
That's great. I just want to say thank you so much, Susanna and Larry, for really walking us through your experiences from a research and academic practicum, a practical experience with Baltimore City Public Schools. I know this is a topic that lots of people are reading about and thinking about, and so your insights are really helpful for folks to chew on and think through, and hopefully we can keep this conversation going. We have actually squared away some time for Q&A now, and so I will go ahead and unmute and put up the webcam so we can see everybody, and hopefully just beyond that too, we can continue this conversation, and I'll share our contact info as well after this. So let me go ahead and unmute all the webcams and the microphones. Do you all have any questions that you would like to share with Larry and Susanna? Not. I hope I did this right, Carol. Are you there? Oh, I'm seeing moderate. Oh, they need permissions. Okay. Well, as we work this out, I do have one question in the chat that we can actually go over, Larry and Susanna. One of the questions I thought was really great was about how do we create a culture that supports tutoring? Volunteering actually was the question. So how do we encourage our young people to give back to their community? Pre-service teachers, recent grads, retirees, how do we make this a community-wide effort that people really want to devote themselves to?
Wow. It's a great question. And I think, there's one of the other interesting design questions. Volunteer tutors versus paid tutors is another one that we're trying to learn about. And of course, when you're asking for this level of consistency 3 times a week, regularly showing up, that's a hard thing for people to do in their kind of nights and weekends. And so, but I think the question is asking something more fundamental, which is like, this is an opportunity to give back. How do we get, one of the people who's part of our working group has been cultivating the participation of 2 of the large Black fraternities who have their graduated members, in both cases, tutoring is a part of their culture when they're undergraduates, and trying to figure out what's the tutoring response that they are going to have. I think that one of the strong ways to build that is essentially to borrow that slide that Susanna started with. Like, this is one of the really good things that could close gaps that are otherwise going to be with us for a very long time if past education data is prologue to what we're going to experience here. Kids who fall behind in early grades, it gets harder and harder for them to catch up unless some sort of intervention is in place. And so I think starting with the strength of that argument, inviting the fact that lots of people can tutor, it isn't the specialized training that classroom teaching requires. And then I do think, depending on where you are, what kind of state or district is, part of building that culture is talking from the beginning to the organizations that represent your teachers. Like, it is not a great thing if tutoring comes in as here's a thing that's better or different or newer than teachers, but rather here's a thing that teachers will deeply understand why tutoring is going to be important if you're going to help their kids get back on track so that they can teach kids at grade level, and so that some of the widening gaps that they're experiencing in their daily lives can be addressed. And our sense is, and Susanna's had conversations with labor organizations, is that people get it, they want to be helpful, but they do want to be consulted.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, I've been amazed at how much voluntary tutoring is out there anyway, that there is, AARP does a really extensive amount of volunteer tutoring. The evidence isn't as strong for volunteers actually as it is for other potential tutors. But I think that's a lot because many of the volunteer places like colleges where I'm at, it's just not a very organized undertaking in terms of what the tutoring is. It's not the kind of thing that we've been calling high impact tutoring, but it doesn't mean that it can't get there. So I think one thing is that we want to inspire people to tutor, whether it's paid or unpaid, but we want to make sure that when they do it well. And so I think, again, trying to make it as easy as possible to do that is really important. There's also someone in our working group who I think made a really good point, is that this will be best if it's driven by the demand of parents and local communities saying, this, I expect this for my child because this is what will help my child do well in school. So I think whatever we can do to kind of engage and activate parents and communities to really care about this, the better.
I agree with that. I'm learning from our StreamPoint experts that there's a couple of ways that we can have folks raise their hand. Carol, are you on? Do you want to illuminate the crowd? And then in the meantime, if you also are camera shy, you can also just continue to submit questions through the chat feature, and we will address those questions as well. Check here. Okay. While we wait, why don't we cover some additional things that have come up? So one of the things that I am curious about, just being a former social worker myself and substitute teacher in the Central Valley, is maybe, Susanna, you can share with us a little bit about what you might be hearing from some of the kiddos, from some of the communities that you're serving. Like, I have a niece and nephew, and they're telling me a little bit about the tutoring they're receiving, but I would love to hear also some of the tidbits that we're hearing from kiddos across the country.
Well, I think actually Larry might be in a better position, Larry, because you are closer to what's going on. I think with us, we're still in trying to figure out how to serve the many students who are really struggling with the COVID pandemic, particularly in Providence, in the area where I am. There are just so many students who should have graduated, but didn't quite get to graduating from college, from high school, because of the lack of access to courses at the end, and really the lack of encouragement. So I think we've, at this point, been hearing much more about the need than about the solution, but because you're in there already, you probably get something about the potential impact of this as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a couple things we're really encouraged by. That idea of a kind of hybrid mode where kids are spending some of the time using software, but it's not that version where like kids are on a machine staring at the screen, interacting only with software for a while, which I think starts to have that kind of screen time numbness effect for kids. But they're doing that for a little while, and they know the reason they're doing it is because the tutor's working with the other kid in their group. And they know that as soon as they're done, that tutor's going to be back to working with them, and they know that the group will come together and then split apart. So I think and kids are, as I said, are just excited that there is real human attention being given to them, and that they have a chance to talk, and that they are noticed. The number of kids who are turning their webcam off and just walking away, and they know that the 30 minutes of class will go by and the teacher may not notice that they are not there. And so the fact that tutoring isn't like that, on the one hand, it's a kind of accountability that kids may not always love, but it is making them interested in the exchange. I do think, especially in cases where the digital divide is strong, whether that's rural schools that don't have the connectivity in the broadband, or urban schools where the broadband is there, but it doesn't mean people can afford it, and devices have been a challenge. Attendance continues to be one of the biggest risks here, that this is all about high dosage, and Baltimore's had the courage to make the investment in high dosage, but we have to get kids there. And I don't think it's worse for tutoring than it is for just classroom instruction. But in both cases, it is hard. And I think, I would like to see districts and organizations like ours really figuring out what is the community approach to attendance support. Like, how do we get social workers and teachers and family members and community members essentially doing the equivalent of block watches that communities do to keep the block safe, the version of a block watch that is get kids to school. And one of the social workers, I think on 60 Minutes the other day, made that comment that it used to be that when I saw a school-age kid walking in the street during school time, that meant they were truant, and now they could be in a remote learning group that isn't, busy, and they're going for a walk, and I don't have any way of verifying that in the moment. So I do think attendance is the challenge, and then there's these charming stories of it being real. Another one that I like is one of our tutors in Baltimore is a former actress who was out in Hollywood before she came back. And so she still has the action clipboard from starting films. And so she incorporates it in her tutoring sessions. She's like, okay, Julia, now it's your turn, action. And the kids in that moment feel like they have to perform because they're on camera and the scene has begun. And the other kids have started to use action as the way to get the next kid to have to say something. And what's nice about that is it's a little gimmick. It gets kids engaged in doing work, but it's also personal. Cynthia's bringing the fact that she was an actress to this exchange, and kids, of course, have questions about, what was it like to be an actress?
And Larry, I just want to bring this to, I think what you're saying is just right. And we've seen it in research in lots of places. So again, if we look at Saga and what they did in Chicago, the tutoring that they did there had that same kind of engagement to it, so that the results of it affected not only the students' math, but also how they did in other classes and whether they graduated from high school, and these other kinds of benefits that you get once you can use tutoring really to engage students and realize that there's an adult there. Because for one district, I was looking recently at the information on students and how connected they feel to adults. And it just drops off so dramatically in middle and then into high school. And you really need that connection, though, to do well. And so this is an opportunity to kind of engage in everything, as well as to address the specific, content needs of the students in terms of what math they need or what help in reading that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like there's a real resiliency factor here as well. Well, thank you so much. I know we're almost at time. We have about a minute to spare. I would just like to thank the two of you for walking us through this engaging discussion, and to really encourage the folks that are in this room now with us to email me if you have any questions. My name is my email is jgonzalez@amplify.com. You can also stop by our virtual booth, where we have some resources there that talk about the remote tutoring work we're doing. And don't be shy. We would love just to sort of brainstorm with you all if you're thinking through how to implement a program like this in your community. Thank you so much.